Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin Cannon, Senior Director of Safety and Health Services with the Associated General Contractors of America. And I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on behalf of AGC, OSHA, and the CPWR, the Center for Construction Research and Training, and our panelists. Over the next hour, our panel will be reviewing trenching and excavation basics, as well as answering some of your questions about working safely during excavation activities. All attendees are automatically muted for the duration of the event, but please feel free to type in any questions at any time. After the presentations, Nicholas DeJesse of the OSHA Philadelphia Regional Office will lead us through some Q&A based on the questions you submitted during registration and those that come in live. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. First, we'll hear from Dr. Douglas Trout, a medical officer with the Office of Construction Safety and Health at NIOSH, followed by presentations from two different contractor partners who will share their experiences and lessons learned. Philip Faulkner wears many hats as a safety director, project manager, and business services specialist with Ed Bell Construction Company. And Perry Sylvie is a safety manager with BTConstruction and is an active member of the Trenching and Excavation Safety Task Force, or TESS. Before I hand it over to Dr. Trout to get us started, I do want to mention that CPWR has done one previous webinar on this topic of trench safety back in 2020, and that is available for viewing on demand as well. I also want to let everyone know that AGC will be hosting two all-day fall protection webinars under the OSHA Susan Harwood Grant Training Program on September 12 and September 13, beginning at 8 a.m. Eastern. I will place a link to the registration in the chat box as well. And with that, thank you to our attendees for joining, and huge thanks to our panelists for giving up their time for this presentation today. And I will turn it over to Doug now. Doug, you can take it away.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm hoping everyone can see my screen correctly. If not, please let me know. I'm really happy to be presenting this afternoon and providing introductory comments to set the stage for Philip and Perry and for Nick in our question and answer session at the end. Here's the basic outline I'll be following today. I'll be reviewing several different types of information related to trenching safety, emphasizing cave-in or collapse hazards, but I won't be presenting all the protective measures related to other trench safety and health issues, which might include falling loads, hazardous atmospheres, and hazards from mobile equipment. I think we might touch on some of those topics in some of our other presentations. I have placed a number of internet links in my slides that I hope will be useful to refer to, and I believe the slides, as Kevin mentioned, will be readily available for viewing later. We're here because construction workers are at risk of death or serious injury if they enter an unprotected trench. Hazards associated with trench work and excavation are defined and preventable. Here are the numbers of workers who have died from trench collapses in the United States since 2017, with the data from the OSHA information system. You can see that for the full years of data between 2017 and 2022, the numbers range between 13 and 39. In a July 2022, so last year, OSHA news release, which was released in the midst of the increased numbers of fatalities in 2022, OSHA announced that in keeping with its national emphasis program for excavations, there would be enhanced enforcement initiatives and outreach programs focused on trenching. So far in 2023, as of early August, there have been 8 workers who have died in trench collapses, with those deaths recorded in the OSHA information system. The OSHA standard for excavation and trenching describes the precautions required by OSHA for safe excavation work and can be found at this location in the Code of Federal Regulations. Among the definitions provided in the standard defines an excavation as any man-made cut, cavity, trench, or depression in an earth surface formed by earth removal. And a trench is defined as a narrow excavation with a depth generally greater than the width, but the width of a trench measured at the bottom is not greater than 15 feet. And I've provided a link to the standard at the bottom of this slide. The OSHA Trenching Excavation webpage also has a link to the standard, but also as well has information on directives, videos, and links to useful publications. Documents from OSHA include a trench and excavation safety publication, which I've noted at this first bullet, and which can be found at the link I have on the slide. This is a 20-page document that highlights key elements of the standard and has sections around pre-planning and protective systems. A shorter resource, which includes some of the main points, is an OSHA Trench and Excavation Safety Fact Sheet, which I have at the second bullet of this fact sheet. And this fact sheet is a brief review in only 2 pages. Next, I'm going to go over a report of 2 workers who died in a trench collapse last year. This is information from the Washington State FACE, or Fatality Assessment and Control Evaluation Program. This incident involved new single-family housing construction. In this incident, a 66-year-old contractor and a 32-year-old laborer died when the trench they were working on collapsed, burying them. A total of 4 workers had been working at a residence for a week to replace a sewer line, and they had dug a trench that was 26 feet long and 24 feet deep. It was 24 feet wide at the top and 8 feet wide at the bottom. The trench was dug in unstable type C soil, and protective systems or methods such as shoring, shielding, for example with trench boxes, or sloping and benching of the sides were not used. The day before the incident, a portion of the trench had collapsed after a rainstorm. On the morning of the incident, one of the workers used a large excavator to scoop out the collapsed soil, and the contractor and her laborer used an extension ladder to enter a 10-foot deep ditch that had been dug in the larger trench. A few moments later, the trench wall collapsed, burying both workers. This is a slide that has a couple of photos, which are a little bit hard to see, but the yellow circles show where the workers had entered the lower portion of the trench and where it had collapsed. Based on the findings that are listed in the report lists a number of requirements based on the Washington State Standard for Protection of Employees in Excavations. The FACE program investigators also made recommendations in the report, including that all trenches should be inspected before workers enter, and that workers never enter a trench or excavation that does not have an adequate protective system in place. And workers should not assume there will be a warning sign before a cave-in, or that there will be time to escape should a collapse occur. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH, which is where I work, has a document called Workplace Solutions Preventing Worker Deaths from Trench Cave-ins. The NIOSH document can be found at this link I have at the bottom of the slide. And as I mentioned before, the OSHA standard, our document mentions that the OSHA standard describes the precautions required by OSHA for excavation work. The NIOSH recommendations presented for employers in this document emphasize that employers should conduct pre-job planning before the job begins. And I'm going to summarize some of those steps after this slide. And also the NIOSH document has recommendations for employers to use safe operations during the job. The next 2 slides include recommendations for employers to perform pre-job planning. Employers should train and designate a competent person to ensure safety measures are in place, with a competent person being one who understands OSHA regulations, can recognize hazards, and is authorized to correct them. Employers should use processes to determine the exact location and depth of utilities before digging. 811 is the national call before you dig phone number that can be useful for this procedure. Employers should have a competent person evaluate the soil to determine its stability. There are resources to help with this, including in an appendix to the OSHA standard, which provides techniques for evaluating the condition of the soil. And employers should plan the job layout to identify safe locations away from the trench for spoil piles and heavy equipment routes. Employers should also have a competent person determine what type of protective system will be used for the job and schedule the steps needed to have the system complete and in place before workers enter. OSHA requires that all excavations 5 feet deep or greater make use of protective system options, which can include sloping or benching the ground, shoring the trench with supports, or shielding the trench, for example, using a trench box. And I think we're going to see some examples of those later in this webinar. OSHA also requires employers to provide ladders, steps, ramps, or other safe means of egress for workers working in trench excavations 4 feet deep or deeper. The NIOSH document notes that trenches greater than 20 feet deep can be more complex and require that the competent person adhere to the OSHA standard with options that can include choosing a manufactured protective system with the appropriate depth rating, or use of a registered professional engineer to design a site-specific protective system. Employers should train workers involved in these jobs about hazards and work practices with the training in a language that they understand and at the appropriate literacy level. And lastly, on this slide, employers should develop a trench emergency action plan to describe steps to be taken and to provide contact information in case of an emergency. I've listed several of the other recommendations from the NIOSH document on this slide. Employers are also responsible for safe operations during the job, including having a competent person inspect the excavation, adjacent areas, and protective systems each day before work, as needed throughout a shift, and specifically after every rainstorm. The NIOSH document lists several recommendations for workers, including those you see here, and recommends that owners and clients insist on trench safety practices when work is commissioned. There are lots of other resources on trench excavation safety, which are good for everyone to know about because different resources may be helpful for different purposes. For example, NIOSH and CPWR also have web pages on this topic, and I've listed the links on this slide. A one-page infographic is shown on this slide, and the infographic is organized around the categories of before you dig it, plan it, when you dig it, use caution, and at the bottom, there's a short section for workers titled, If You Work in a Trench. There are short videos available, including one from just last month from the Laborers Health and Safety Fund of North America, and that video is called An Overview of Basic Trench Safety. NIOSH published a science blog in 2021, which reviewed trenching safety and construction. But the science blog also focused on current issues related to alternatives to trenching. Consistent with the hierarchy of controls, one way to prevent trench collapse and in turn trenching fatalities is to use alternative methods where feasible. Among the alternatives to digging a trench are directional boring, pipe ramming, utility tunneling and pipe jacking, or relining the existing pipe, including the technique known as cured-in-place pipe. Cured-in-place pipe techniques may be used in some situations to perform needed maintenance or repair of underground pipes. This link at the bottom of the slide is the link for a different NIOSH science blog from a couple of years ago that explains some of the basics of cured-in-place pipe techniques. Briefly, if a cured-in-place pipe technique can be used, it could be faster and less expensive because it would eliminate the need to dig a trench. It could provide less disruption to the community and may be done more quickly. NIOSH staff are conducting evaluations and research to learn more about whether it is actually a safer process because cured-in-place pipe techniques may involve issues such as confined space entry and the potential for chemical exposures. More information on the NIOSH health hazard evaluation on this topic is available at the link I have at the top of this slide, which is for a report titled Cured-in-Place Pipe, Liner Preparation and Installation. And lastly, for my introduction to the rest of today's webinar, a trench safety stand down was first held in 2016, organized by the National Utility Contractors Association, with OSHA joining as a partner a year later. As you know, a safety stand down is an opportunity for employers to talk directly to employees and others about safety. June 2024, so next June, will be the 5th annual Trench Safety Month. And we encourage you to keep your eyes open for the mid-June 2024 dates for next year's Trench Safety Stand Down. So with that, I'll end my introductory comments and turn it back for the rest of the webinar. I have in my presentation our email addresses, and of course, we at NIOSH, Dr. Ernest and Captain Elizabeth Garza, who work in the office with me, we're always happy to answer any questions or provide any assistance that we can. Thank you.
Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Philip Faulkner. I'm a safety director for Ed Bell Construction here in Dallas, Texas. And just to give a touch of a background so you can kind of see the perspective on the comments I'm going to make, before my journey in safety management, I spent a long time as an operations manager. So I've seen both sides of this equation, not only building it, but making sure everybody's building it safely and everybody goes home at the end of the day. So I try to make my presentations and my training a little less as we go along about process and procedure, and a lot more about culture and adoption. So the comments I have today are about, what I have found to be some best practices that we use here in North Texas to really ensure that the processes and programs we set up, our people have the ability to be successful with them. So one of the first things that, I know Doug mentioned was also appropriate processes for soil classification. I think a good process is part of your planning, really determining soil classification, what type of system necessary before you start digging, before you get the crew in there. You kind of put your people's back against the wall if they've already started, putting a bucket in the ground, and then they're trying to figure this out, and they either don't have the right protection system, or they've got to move from benching to a protection system, or whatever it may be. Having this done well in advance is part of the critical planning process. Making sure you've got support to your team to help determine the correct protective measures. You can have a competent person on site, but having additional resources, even for a competent person, sometimes two heads are better than one. If you've got multiple people trained for competent person training, making sure they're discussing with each other. It's always better to get kind of a group consensus than if one person's just unsure about what they've got on their hands. And that not only goes for soil classification, but what type of shoring is appropriate. I can tell you here in North Texas, and this won't be very common, in some other parts of the country, but I know a lot of contractors around here are in a constant state of trying to figure out what's the least amount they can do. That's absolutely the wrong attitude to take. Rock and type A soils, boy, they're just not as common as everybody would like to believe for people trying to mitigate and minimize their protection systems. In an urban area, specifically like, Dallas-Fort Worth, where I work, but many of the metro areas across the country, it is hard to find undisturbed soil. So I think, instead of really approaching things with what's the minimum I can do that meets the OSHA guidelines, you absolutely need to go to the other end of that spectrum and go, what's absolutely the maximum I can do to protect my people and protect the workplace. So another thing I've seen as I've went along here is when something does happen, and this isn't always true, but in my experience, everybody gets in at the start of the day, or the start of the trench, or the start of the placement of the protection system, and they really start, evaluating it. Then everybody focuses, your competent person focuses, your foreman and your employees focus. But some excavations are set up permanently for many days or weeks to do something, but a lot of these are trenches for pipelines, and they move during the day. Some crews can get 200 or 300 foot of pipe in the ground today. So they're moving protection systems as they go. They're moving through what could be changing soil conditions, changing construction sites where equipment routes and stockpiles and all these things are kind of fluid and kind of in motion. I think too often we get to the point where when we get started, you have an inspection happen, everybody checks on things. And then I think everybody gets a false sense of security of, well, we checked it, the guys know what they're doing, everything seems to be by the book for today, we're good. And then you look up and they've moved down 50, 100 feet down the road, and maybe it's the exact same conditions. Maybe the entire world has changed for these people. You can't just plug and play. You can't set and forget it. And you need to be training your people that evaluation and inspection process, it's live and it's constant, and it needs to be something in their minds. There's never a spot where they get to check that box and go, okay, I'm done with that step for the day. They need to be continuously monitoring that. Competent person and your foreman's got to be aware of the other operations impacting their safety. You may not just be the only contractor on site. There may be other factors moving in here. And as you go along through the day, your operation may have haul routes designated and stockpiles planned and fall protection in place. But if you're not the only contractor on site, you need to be planning in coordination with other people on that site to make sure they don't get hurt by your excavation or they don't hurt your people in your excavation. So planning is not just in-house only. You have to communicate with everybody else on the site. And as always, make sure your employees have the right and the expectation to stop work. If something doesn't look right, stop and really get with your people and go, this was working this morning and this is a whole different ball game now. It's okay to stop and reevaluate things and take a knee if necessary. I get asked a lot, who are you training? What are you really doing here for your people? I know a lot of contractors focus on getting a handful of people trained enough that they can serve as competent persons to check a box. I really just don't think that's a good way to go about it because, even if you're in a small job, that competent person's there all the time, focused all the time, but sometimes the excavation, he still can't get every angle of it at one point. Having supervisors around that may not be designated as the competent person, but are trained to do so is really just a pretty easy process for you to accomplish when you train your folks. I also double around that while they may not be designated as competent people at any point, I go through maybe an abbreviated training once a year for us in our annual boot camp for our safety training, that everybody who's expected to go into a trench or be adjacent to a trench with their operations goes through an abbreviated part of that same training. So everybody knows what those expectations are. And you got to keep that training going. You can't be like, well, I checked the training box this year for trench protection. We can move on to fall protection or caught in between or something. If you've got folks that work in open excavations, that needs to be a regular recurring training multiple times a year. And you've got to communicate your expectations of what you want done and what they need to do safely to get the work done, and make sure you're providing them the resources they need to do it. But I'm a big fan of, if you go into that trench, you ought to have a working knowledge of the expectations of what the competent person is looking for. Don't just have one guy on site to check that box to go, yeah, we got a guy. He just can't see everything sometimes, and you need to have everybody perceptive of what's right and what's wrong. Boy, don't get forest for the trees syndrome, especially if you're on a complex excavation or a complex trench setup. Especially if it's taken a lot of engineering, a lot of planning, a lot of teamwork, a lot of process to get it in there. It's so easy to just kind of get tunnel vision on making sure that you're preventing a collapse or preventing any sort of failure here, that there's all these other risks that you can blow by. I've seen it one too many times where a team has gotten very excited and gotten everything done correctly and got a complex shoring and protection system in. And once they feel like that's good, off they go into the trench. And I'm like, have you checked for gas? Have you checked your atmosphere? And then they're all like, oh, so atmospheric hazards, that's always a potential and needs to be checked at the start of the time you get the trench protection in and ongoing through the day. Be mindful of critical lift plans. We're building these trenches to generally put things in the ground or take things out of the ground, often heavy, often awkward, and oftentimes equipment to make sure you have a safe excavation is a little bit further back from the trench often than what would normally be done here. So you may have things that aren't normally a critical lift pushed into that capacity. So make sure you're being aware, because the guys have very limited escape routes when they're down in that trench and excavation. It's not as easy to get away from problems with a lifted load as it is on even ground. And make sure you're still placing your fall protection where applicable. Make sure that the people up top are protected, because the competent person, inspectors, there's a number of people that will come to see what's going on in the excavation or may play some role that doesn't have them down in there. It's no different than a wall or a bridge or a roof or a ceiling. You've got to protect those people. The big thing I preach to my team here and other folks here in Texas is making sure that, overconfidence is one thing, but there's a close enough mentality. Crews get out there and they may have had a plan. They've got a certain protection system or a benching plan in place. They've got what type of equipment they think they needed. And then they get going. And of course, the competent person or somebody may decide, well, you know, this isn't quite up to par of what we need. And then they have a, yeah, but it's close enough, because if not, we're going to have to stop and wait on getting new things out here or put a plug in it. You know, we all got to keep in mind that there's almost no excavation we do where you're not at some sort of chance for injury or death. Even the ones like shown in the picture here, where the guys are, you know, generally barely what you would consider at a risk there, you know, you can still have a small failure, get them caught in there. Maybe that's not a fatality risk, but they will be injured. It's a challenge every time you do one, no matter what it looks like, and close enough is going to eventually catch up with you. Make sure that planning is just as important as your execution. I have got a lot of times after an incident happens where the employee tells me, I feel like I just didn't have time to make it right because we were behind, because I was going to have to wait on a different protection system. You got to make sure your guys don't feel like they're caught, they're trapped, they're forced, they're up against the wall. You need to make sure express in your training and your daily planning and your operational planning that these guys understand if it's not right, it's absolutely okay to take a knee until it is. And make sure you're preaching to them that production takes that back seat to getting a safe excavation. And it's important as a competent person and as a supervisor, not only from a safety supervisory standpoint, but an operations standpoint. Are you conveying that to everybody in the trench, not just the foreman, not just the superintendent? Is everybody in and adjacent to that excavation having it conveyed to them that if it's not right, you need to move out and we need to stop? So it's important that communication is key there. Lastly, something I think is a big thing that everybody gets into is, you know, do you have the right protection system? Too often, I know down in the South here, folks will invest a lot of money in their trench boxes and they drag them around everywhere. And once they start digging, you know, it works 90% of the time. But then you get into something that may be similar to what's shown in the picture here, or you get into some other soil conditions or different utility conditions where you can't move that trench box or place it like you would expect to. And a lot of those people just suddenly go, well, what now do we do? And they start trying to figure out how to make the system they've got work, when the real answer is you got to take a knee and figure out what systems are available and what the right condition is. So this is where good planning, good, you know, pre-construction work, soil testing, making sure you understand utility locations, or using 811 to understand what you're going through in there. You know, if you've got a spot where you know you have multiple utility lines of whatever type, you shouldn't be going into there with a trench box. You should be looking for a shielding system that has some modular capability like what's shown here. There's a number of things like the depth of your excavation, which soil conditions are, utilities, groundwater, and just what your access is. You've got to know all that. And even if it's to check the box to go, it's a non-factor here, or we're good, you've got to run that trap every time. And making sure people that if it does get complex, feel like they can seek help. Sometimes the plan is not just, hey, we're going to do what we did on the last job. Sometimes you have to do a plan from scratch. Talk to your people, talk to the competent person, talk to your people that are experienced with engineering plans, seek the help of a registered engineer if that's what it takes. Talk to your vendors that deal in trench protection. They can bring in things that have gone on at other jobs across the country that may give some different solutions. That don't feel like you're on an island and you have to do all this by yourself. And, you know, just the last thing, if you're just trying to make it work because this is what we got, that will catch up with you. It may not be a problem today or tomorrow, but eventually that will be an issue. So, Jessica, that's what I've got here. If there's any questions, we can take them at the end, but that's what I've got for now. So I will pass it on to, let's see, where did he go? Perry. So thank you.
Well, hi guys. My name is Perry Sylvie. I'm with BTConstruction and B Trenchless, and I'm also the chairman of the Trenching and Excavation Safety Task Force. So I'm going to change gears with our presentation today and share a little bit about what we've been doing with this task force, and really just an introduction to what this is all about. We've been together as a group here for a few years, and hoping to make an impact across the country, and hopefully some folks here can take away some things from this presentation, and maybe learn a little bit about what we're doing and how you guys can get involved. So Trenching and Excavation Safety Task Force, aka TEST. So what we're going to learn today is a little bit of an introduction. So we're going to answer some of the basic questions about the group and what we've been doing over like I say, the last few years here. So we'll answer the what, why, who, when, and where on the group. And hopefully, again, there could be some takeaways here and some things that maybe we can have some more folks join our volunteer effort. We're not getting paid for any of this. This is not at all a money grab. All this is an awareness campaign. And we're doing our best here to raise awareness and hopefully prevent trench collapse fatalities in the construction industry and try to make an impact for the industry as a whole. So what is TEST? Again, we're the Trenching and Excavation Safety Task Force, and what we do is we started this to bring more awareness to trenching and excavation safety and help prevent injuries and fatalities. And our mission, when we started meeting as a group, we actually created a mission, and this is just to keep us focused as a task force and make sure that we're all moving in the right direction, in the same direction. And so our mission is to create industry awareness and drive insight into trenching and excavation safety, collaborating without organizational or geographic boundaries in an effort to improve day-to-day safety for field workers. And right away, we came up with the Think Inside the Box message. So the hashtag Think Inside the Box is something we're utilizing on social media platforms. So any searches on there, if anybody were to search for that hashtag, you should find any of our posts that we've been putting out there and being able to again, get a consistent message across the board. The pictures that you're seeing here is the reason why we started this task force. This event occurred in northern Colorado, and it occurred on April 16th, 2019 in Windsor, Colorado. This trench collapse killed 2 people. It killed 26-year-old Christopher Ramirez of Boulder, Colorado, and 41-year-old Jorge Valadez of Denver. 2 people that did not need to lose their lives, and it was very impactful for us in Colorado, and this is what prompted this event. The story goes, they were digging for a sewer service. This PVC pipe that they were installing in the ground was installed roughly 15 feet deep. And during the quote unquote rescue operation, they were able to get a PVC pipe down to one of the workers, and they were able to communicate with him. These firefighters could actually talk to him for several hours after the collapse. And then they actually called his wife, and he was able to talk to her before he passed away. And shortly after then, she actually had their baby boy. So a really impactful story, one that really drives us even till this day, and one that we hope we can never repeat again. We don't want to see any of these types of events ever occur. The unfortunate thing on this particular incident was that there was a trench box on site, and they chose not to use it. So of course, our question is always, why? Why did they choose not to use a protective system when it's readily available? So we continue to ask that question, and we continue to try to find solutions and try to find creative ways to help folks make the right decision. 1 week after this event occurred, we actually had a meeting with our AJC Safety Council, the local Colorado chapter, and that's when we started this task force. There were about 60 safety professionals in the room, and I stood up in that room and I said, guys, we got to do something. I don't know what, but we need to do something. We need to figure out how we can stop these kinds of events from occurring. This cannot continue. So we immediately started meeting that day, and we got about probably half of those folks in that room, and we just started brainstorming, and we started coming up with some things that we could do to try to create some awareness, try to get this word out. And that's when we came up with the Think Inside the Box concept. And we'll share some of that here after this little video that we're going to watch.
This is a once in a career type incident.
The call that cleared the garage on Tuesday
It was empty. Yeah.
sent everyone, including Chief Chris Kazian,
It was a long day.
to a home construction site on Camberley Drive.
All that dirt is all dirt that caved in.
2 workers in a trench were buried in about 8 tons of dirt.
So very heavy, very compacted when it all collapsed.
Fire crews don't think anything was used to shore up the trench walls.
On arrival, we did not see a trench box in place.
They used heavy equipment and eventually shovels to dig.
Every time we got a bucket or 2 of dirt out, more dirt would fall in on them.
They knew at least 1 worker was still alive.
For whatever reason, in this case, he was able to breathe for hours.
Able to talk, too, first through PVC pipe and then through a microphone to family gathered at the scene.
Our crews felt that it was important for this family and for him to have an opportunity to speak.
A chance to say goodbye.
As responders, we were concerned that we might have a poor outcome, but we wanted to make sure that he and they got a chance to communicate.
It'd be nearly 12 hours before crews pulled the men's bodies from the dirt.
So it's very challenging for all of the responders, mentally and physically.
The kind of call no chief wants to repeat.
Our thoughts are with the families. It's definitely a tough time, and certainly not the outcome that we were looking for, and we worked very hard to have a different outcome.
In Windsor, Noel Brennan, 9 News.
Last year, OSHA announced it was making it a priority to reduce trenching and excavation accidents. This comes after 23 workers were killed nationally in 2016, another 32 in 2017 and 2018.
So again, the message we came up with is think inside the box. This message is catchy, right? It's something that we think can be universal. It's something that we see as a message that anybody and everybody will understand. It's something that you can see that box, that picture of a trench box. And we're able to identify that quickly to know that that box is a protective measure. And all of us in the industry know that this box does what it's supposed to do if you actually use it. So that catchy phrase is something not just about the trench box and the protective system, but also it's a measure of protection that is established. It is a measure that has been working for a long time. So thinking inside the box is important. We don't need to think outside the box. We don't need to think of a new method because the old tried and true methods work. If we think inside the box, it will work. And then we came up with the color. We see that all the trench boxes that are out there all the different vendors have their own colors. There's yellow boxes, red boxes, blue boxes, pink boxes, all the different colors out in the industry. But eventually they all turn to rust anyway. So it's universal, and it's something that every one of the vendors can stand behind because it's something that all boxes will turn that color eventually. So we came up with that to try to get really the cooperation from all of the companies out in the industry and hope that everybody will stand behind this message. And again, that identifiable safety device, that trench box that has spreaders and it has engineered shield systems that's designed to protect an employee in the event of a cave-in. And of course, there's other methods. There's sloping and there's shoring systems. The shoring systems are to prevent the cave-in. Of course, we stand behind those as well. We just saw this as really the most popular method and the method of protection that's really the least expensive. We should be able to make this happen, right? A slope, you're going to have more dirt to be able to dig out and then backfill. And as far as the shield system, it should be the most popular, the easiest method to get our hands on to protect our employees. So we saw that as a real strong message all across the board, and hopefully it will be something that can be really every company and every person in the industry should be able to stand behind that message. So right away, when we started meeting, we started brainstorming and we came up with the idea to come up with a website. And the website's really a good central point of contact, a place where anybody can go and see some information. And on the website, there's a lot of information on there. There's some some links for past incidents in the news. There's some best practices or some links in there for training resources. There's companies that we've been basically working with that they wanted to be on the website, and it's free. This is free for anybody who wants to be a part of this. If you're a company that does trenching and excavation safety training, TEST, then yeah, you're welcome to join on to this website as well, and we'll get your information and load you up there. We'll put a link up on that website. So feel free to reach out if you'd like to be added to that. And for those folks that need that training, this is hopefully a great location for anybody to go to find good training resources. We've got a logo at the bottom of the page, so that Think Inside the Box logo is free for anyone to download. And we encourage you guys to take that logo and make it your own. Put your own logo in it. We'll show a slide what that looks like here in a little bit. But it's a great, really a central point of contact for a lot of different things related to trench safety. And I encourage everybody here to check that out. The next site here, which we really concentrated our efforts on LinkedIn, we now have over 11,000 followers on our LinkedIn page. And it's a strong following, not only across the country, but we've seen a lot folks around the country that are really starting to stand behind this message. So we're really excited to be able to share just really how many people are really getting excited about this message, and hopefully sharing it with their people and their employees and those other people in their industry. And hopefully with everything that we're doing, we can hopefully really save lives in trenching and excavation. So encourage you guys to check that out on LinkedIn. And really look on there, because there's a lot of things we share that really don't make it to the website. It's really a lot that we concentrate our efforts there on LinkedIn, and really get a lot of participation through that. A lot of people sharing things and hopefully getting it to their networks. And it's a grassroots effort that we're doing that gets this message to a lot more people. We also have the Facebook page and all of our other social media pages, Instagram, Twitter, or X now. Those pages all have the tag Excavate Safe. So if you were to search on any of those sites and you look for Excavate Safe, it will pop up with the Trenching and Excavation Safety Task Force. So at Excavate Safe is really the standard link that we would have for all of our pages. We do not have a TikTok account that we're currently active on, but if anybody is at the young age that would be willing to help us out there, we could use some volunteers to help us really grow a different age group of folks that might be interested to reach to the different crowd out there that I really don't know how to do. So I figured throw that out there, and feel free to reach out if anyone would like to help us manage those other accounts. And then where are we? Well, we've got a Gmail account. It's really something we started right away, that just to be able to have everything organized and even just compartmentalized, because this task force has grown a little bit more than what we originally thought. So again, since 2019, we've really blown up in everything that we've done. So excited to be able to share some of this. We've got a phone number even, and this wasn't a phone number, it was just random. We were able to actually create the number based on some things in here that hopefully resonate with everybody here. So as long as you remember 740 and then Trench Excavation Safety, Think Inside the Box, there's your phone number. So feel free to reach out, text us. We've got that number is definitely still being utilized. So if anyone has questions or would like to reach out, feel free to give us a holler. And then who are we? We're passionate about trenching excavation safety. And that's not just me. There's a group of us all across the country and around the world that are passionate about trench safety, and it's countless folks. So we want to be able to reach to the right people, the people that need to hear this message the most. We're not bound by organizational geographic boundaries. That's part of our mission. And it's important that we don't really pigeonhole ourselves. It's something that we're broad spectrum, and we want to be able to help anybody and everybody. And then what's new? Well, we've got a Spanish side of our website. So everything that's on that English website, thinkinsidethebox.info, we have now mirrored that, and everything that is on the main website has now been translated and put into Spanish, which we see really that's a big part of our challenge, is to reach the people that are out there doing the work. They're getting into the trenches, and we see a lot of the Spanish speaking workers, or at least the English as a second language, is the folks that we think we need to really try to concentrate and reach. So feel free to check that out and pass that along to folks that maybe aren't speaking English but would like to learn a little bit about trench safety. And then, as I mentioned earlier, go down to the website and download that logo off the website. These are just some examples of a couple of the logos that have been created out there. And feel free to grab it and make it your own. Put your logo there. Put your logo inside the box. It's a great place to put it, and it really shows that you support the message in your organization. Really, the hard hat stickers, we see that as the best way to reach the people in the field. Those guys out there love stickers on their hard hats. It's a great way to really create conversation. Somebody's going to see that sticker and go, where'd you get that? How do I get one? And what does that mean? Think inside the box. And hopefully it starts to prompt the question and get guys really thinking about what trench safety really means. So there's a lot to it there, and really hoping that everybody takes that and runs with it. And then recently, back in November, we were adopted by the National Utility Contractors Association. So we've joined forces with those guys, and at a national level, they're really helping us to really push this message a little further than what we could do at the local level. So pretty excited to get that help from the national level there, to get some resources and really it's a little bit more exposure at that national level. So we were able to get involved in the Trench Safety Stand Down Week, and we hope that next year we can be an even more integral part of the stand down and get more people involved in trench safety. So really excited about that. And if anybody's interested in getting involved, feel free to reach out either through our website. We've got a contact us section on the website. We've also got that Gmail account, thinkinsidetheboxinfo@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out. We'd love to have you guys part of our group there. And we've got quarterly update meetings. So we always do it January, April, July, and October. So we're coming up on our October meeting here in a couple months. So looking forward to seeing folks get involved there. We'll get your email loaded. If you want to send an email off to us, we'll get your email added to the list and get you guys in there to get involved in our task force meeting. So it is a free meeting. It's really a bunch of volunteers just trying to raise awareness for trench safety. And we'd love to have as many people on there as possible, because you never know what ideas can be presented in a group like that. So that's really all that I have for the group, and looking forward to answering any questions that anybody has in our next session there.
Perry, thank you for that. And also to Dr. Trout and also Philip as well. We do have some questions that we received prior to the webinar, and we also do have a few of them actually in the Q&A section of the webinar as well. I have been answering them as time has gone along. Hopefully they have been to the point and are satisfactory. I will say this to you as well, two things. One, I put into the chat the OSHA Region 3 Focus 4 campaign email address. Feel free to shoot us an email if you would like to be included in all of our communications when it comes to our campaign. During the year, we run a 4-month campaign, but at this point, we're running a 12-month campaign when it comes to raising awareness on the hazards that are killing workers in construction. That includes, obviously, trenching and excavation. Secondly, I put in the consultation link. That is for small businesses. So if you are an employer that has less than 250 employees, you can get a free consultative visit. Also can get some training and education as well through the consultation service. I will include my email at the end as well. If I didn't answer your questions perfectly or you want to continue the conversation, I'm more than happy to talk. Folks that know me out there probably will tell me, Nick, shut up because you talk too much. So let's get to a few of the questions that were posed to the panelists prior to the start of the webinar. First, and this goes toward Perry. Perry, how would you administer the test program in a university setting, and who would be your partners?
Yeah, so appreciate that question. Really the way that it works is anybody's welcome to be part of our group. So as far as a university setting, it's definitely something we've gotten involved at universities before. Colorado area, CSU and CU have asked to be a part of that. And of course, we definitely invite them in to our group there. So feel free to reach out through our website there, the contact us section, or in our Gmail account, thinkinsidetheboxinfo@gmail. And we're happy to include you guys. And, we can do webinars like this through the universities. We've done a little bit of trench safety classes, and we can also hook up with any of those university level folks with any of the professionals that we have. That those links are on that website there, thinkinsidethebox.info. And we've got a lot of trench safety trainers that are part of that could help at the university level as well.
Appreciate that, Perry. And for the folks that are on the webinar as well, this group here of partners, if you will, between NIOSH, ourselves here at OSHA, AGC, and their member groups, the point we're trying to demonstrate here is that, yes, this is obviously an important topic, but you can see through partnership how we can raise awareness, how we can spread information, how we can reach as many people as possible in this arena to drive down the amount of incidents that are occurring in and around excavation work. And the next question goes for either Philip or Perry. And the question is, this again is on the operational side of the house where, your hands get dirty. What is the best way to protect a gas utility, prevent damage after it is exposed?
I can take this one first, Perry, if you'd like. So when we get into this condition with a gas line, the first thing I reach out to the gas line representative in the company. You can see there can still have best practice.
Just here is Phil breaking up. Phil.
Yeah, you're breaking up on my end now too, Phil.
Okay, you might just want to turn your camera off for better audio.
Hopefully that worked. If not, we can push over to Perry if possible. Philip, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you guys hear me now?
No.
Perfect now. Clear. Yep.
Sorry.
Okay.
So what I was saying is reach out to your gas line representative, see what advice they can give on support, and see if there's not something else adjacent that's you may need to take into consideration for support. In North Texas, we look and see if it's a steel or poly line. That way it'll kind of determine, the length of exposure, if you've got to block it up to prevent any sag. I think the main thing I tell my folks around here is no mechanical digging. If you've got an exposed gas line, and this would go for any life critical lines like electrical or fuel lines, just hand dig only. With steel lines, I do 5 feet. With poly lines, I do more just because of its fragility. I make sure sometimes I will assign a competent person, of course, but I'll put a second guy there just to ensure with the gas line guy that we're meeting those needs. And probably an operational point I do is considering whatever you're trying to lift in and out of the hole, talk about the lifting weight to make sure you don't have to put any more heavy equipment or heavy material adjacent to your operation point, which can cause ground shift outside your trench. I've had that happen before too, that we damaged the line that was still buried just because of what we put on top of it. So I think there's some good practices there, but I'll pass on to Perry to see if he's got anything.
Yeah, I can add to that. And honestly, dealing with those high profile facilities, whether it's gas or electric, the challenge really is how do you prevent damage, even if you got to work around that facility. If you dig around it and then you have a large chunk of dirt that falls off and it ends up falling on that facility and damaging it, that's really something you want to try to prevent as well. So it really comes down to pre-planning and just making sure that you have all the right protective measures in place. And I like what you said there about contacting the facility owner. Out here in Colorado, it's Excel Energy, and so we definitely work with their damage prevention team and really try to do everything we can to prevent damage, work around that line safely.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Perry. Next question, again, comes more operational side of the house. How does your company, or how do you recommend that employers conduct and document the daily excavation safety inspections?
I could take that. So yeah, we have a daily job hazard analysis book that we utilize, and each day the guys are filling that out. It is a piece of paper, but it is something that is, our guys do a great job of filling it out. And I brought an example of a box that we utilize. And so when we're on the job site, we have a red box, and that red box houses our JHA book and any important papers and permits and documents that we utilize. And it's something that our employees are required to help any people that come out to the job site, help them understand what challenges that they might encounter as they're visiting our job sites. So they have to basically find that red box and go over that with us. And in that JHA is the excavation permit. And it's our BT permit that we fill out just to make sure that we're checking, all those important items, what protective system are we using? What depth are we going? Is there groundwater? What utilities are we crossing? Just understanding all the risks before we're working around that. And then the competent person and the supervisor are really filling that out and working together to ensure the safety of our people.
One thing I'd like to add to that is we do something very similar to that, Perry. I make sure every time we have our JHA and our excavation permit documents, we take a copy of whatever the original plan was and make sure they've got it as a reference. So if they realize that they're coming up with solutions that may be viable, but it's too far off the original plan, there probably still needs to be a look there to see why there's such a deviance.
Switching gears, and I'm going to stay operational, if that's okay for Perry and Philip. There's a question in the Q&A that asks, can any of you speak to the use of Smart Shore, the inflatable trench shields, which claim to be OSHA compliant?
I cannot. That's not something we have evaluated for our firm.
Yeah, we've seen those, and again, haven't actually utilized them yet. So we've asked a couple of our vendors in town to try to look into that for us, because it does look like it's a solution that could be pretty good for some of those shallow excavations, or something that you can bring out in a suitcase and inflate. And we've heard that it could be a good solution, but haven't actually seen it in person yet.
And that question came from Jay Hokut, I believe his last name is pronounced. Jay, I have not seen it, just to let you know, in use, nor looked at it, but you've scratched my interest, and I'm going to take a look at it after the webinar today. The next question, again, more on the operational side of the house for Philip and Perry. What is the best way to measure an excavation to be accurate in the measurements? Is there an advanced tool for taking measurements?
So I will tell you that the way we do it, I kind of split it into a shallow excavation and a larger excavation. My crew's got stuff like levels and lasers and a lot of things they can do to get good depth measurements and width measurements without exposing themselves to the excavation. But if you have the resource available, when you start getting deep, 15, 20 foot plus, man, if you've got field engineering or survey crews, because you've really got to start not only looking at the depth, but are your benches correct? Are your slopes correct? Is everything exactly like what you're after? Especially if you have a combination of those. Like if you get into some very deep cuts, we did one once that we had about a 60-foot cut, and it involved a trench, a bench on top of that, and then sloping on top of that to some massive cut that was 150 foot wide. You've got to call in some resources. That's probably a little bit outside of even a competent person to take on his own. So I think there's just some basic surveying or grade instruments that can get you started, but you got to move on to getting some help and have some more detailed tools is what we would suggest.
Perry, anything to add on that one?
I don't think so. I think Philip really handled that well.
And I will tell you at least how we do it. So if anyone is interested, you can go to the compliance directive that was pushed out in 2021. The compliance directive also has our OSHA technical manual, and I forgot the chapter off the top of my head, but it will tell you how we actually do our measuring when we come out during inspections to take a look at the excavation. I think we're coming up on the top of the hour, so if it's okay, we're going to have one more question. Let's try to go to one of the live questions. And Tina Chen had asked, what happened in 2022 for the huge jump of deaths? Perry, do you want to start with that one and maybe I'll chime in after?
Yeah, we definitely want to know what that is as well. So I think we're just as baffled to see those jumps in deaths and the numbers. It really was very difficult to see those numbers climb, and especially halfway through the year to see those numbers being more than the previous year. So it's definitely a question we're always trying to answer year over year. So I think if I were to make some educated guesses, some of the things that we've seen as far as trends would be the smaller contractors, the folks that are maybe going in there to do sewer service, either installs, brand new installs for sewer service, or sewer service repairs. When you think about a repair, why is it being repaired? Well, the bottom of that excavation is now going to be very saturated with sewer water. And that now is going to be a major concern for potential trench collapse. And there's been a few here locally in Colorado that have been a sewer service repair where they dug it mostly vertical, and it ended up collapsing and killing folks. So that's something as far as a trend that we've seen. Yeah, I'd love to hear, Nick, a little bit about from your end of it.
Sure. So the majority that I've looked at, again, have not been major. What I mean by that is over 10 feet. Some of them have been conditions similar to what you're speaking of as well. We've seen, at least in what I've read, a lack of education, a lack of training, a lack of the competent person knowing what soil analysis is, understanding protective systems, understanding spoil pile, and things to that nature. So it's been a variety, Tina, of reasons why. I will say it may be due to the fact that there's more work going on since there's been more infrastructure bills being pushed across the country, and we're seeing more and more infrastructure issues, if you will, especially underground with some of our utilities and some of the other systems that are out there that are decaying over time. They need to be replaced. So that may be a contributing factor as well. I don't have all the data at the moment, but at least in the ones that I've seen. The one thing that we do try to take a look at too, or is on the leading indicator side, is the number of collapses that are occurring, not necessarily how many resulted in the death, which would be the lagging indicator. But that number has been steady throughout that I've looked at least in the past 2 to 3 years. There is not really the greatest source, to be honest with you, when it comes to trying to track that, except for media and some of the associations that we have partnered with that will send out emails and information on these types of events at this point. And I see it's 3:03, but we may be able to sneak one more question in if that's okay. If that's okay with the panelists.
One more.
Sure. So the question was from Ram Sokol, and I believe Sokol, hopefully I'm pronouncing your last name well. Please explain the effects of extreme drought has on soil conditions experienced in Texas this summer. Perry or Phil, you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, that sounds like that's pretty much right up my alley. Boy, you know, the extreme drought, the extreme temperatures, especially after you had a not so extreme spring around here, definitely put us on point that, you know, the soil's fractured, the soil is probably has some instability in it in places you can't see. Even the top of it, you may have one condition, you get down a couple feet, you have a second condition. So it's made us honestly very distrustful of what we think we know. We're definitely taking a more safe approach is not the right word, but a more cautionary approach to everything we're doing. But I will tell you that those fractures can run 10, 15 foot deep here in that drought ground, especially when you get these expansive clay soils down here. The further you get up on that PI on that material, the worse that cracking and instability can be. So, you know, I would definitely say if you're on the fence, if you've got between A and B and C, you just need to roll to the more cautionary side. That's what we do.
Yeah, and I could add to that as well. You know, you've got the drying soils that really, again, when the soil's dry, they start to, you know, really pull away from each other. The soil particles start to create those fissures and cracks, and it's something you really can't see. You know, you can't see through the dirt to see where those are. So definitely something to take that conservative method and really do the extra protection, and really you look at it like everything's a type C soil, regardless of how well you think it's holding up. It's not a matter of if it'll collapse. It's a matter of when will it collapse. And we've had similar challenges when it comes to freeze thaw cycles. So in the wintertime, when it freezes, and then once it thaws, right, the freezing actually expands, and then as it thaws, it starts to break apart, and you could get those large fissures and cracks that could cause the collapse as well. So taking that extra precaution, even though you think it's holding up, just be a little more conservative and put that box in there just in case.
Fantastic. Thank you, Perry. Thank you, Philip. And actually thank all of our panelists, including Dr. Trout and Kevin Cannon, who hosted earlier. Jessica Bunting from CPWR, who is always doing a fantastic job of research and also training and education and partnering with us. Jessica, back to you, or Kevin, back to you if you have any parting thoughts.
A few parting thoughts. Again, just to echo Nick, thank you, Doug, Philip, Perry, and Nick. Great information, both from, the data side from NIOSH, but also the operational side from both Philip and Perry. And I also want to thank everyone for logging in to today's program. And, again, in the chat, the great questions. As I mentioned at the outset, the webinar has been recorded and will be posted to cpwr.com and shared in the follow-up email with everyone who registered. And also want to give a plug for the next CPWR webinar that will take place on September 13th on the topic of suicide prevention in the construction industry. So again, great job, everyone, and great information, and look forward to doing it again.